welcome everybody. Thank you for coming along to this Champions for Earth session with Donnachadh McCarthy, a journalist and author. We're super proud to have him here and really grateful for his time. Just to explain, Champions for Earth is all about educating, inspiring and supporting the sports people and athletes, both past and present, to act and speak out for climate and nature however they feel motivated to. We're also really trying to assist and support getting athletes' voices heard through the media and getting them connected to the right people who might be able to help with what they're doing. And we're also about creating a sense of community to support each other emotionally through these difficult times and through the challenges that we're facing. So we're very, very proud to have, many of the guests that we have on our recordings, and tonight is no exception. So I'm going to hand over to Dave now to introduce our guests. So thank you everybody once again for being here. And if you can mute yourselves from now on, we'll open up for questions once Donnachadh has finished. Thank you very much.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you, Etty. Great intro as ever. And hello, lovely champs and friends of champs. And hello, Donnachadh. Really pleased to have the job of introducing you tonight. We first met over 20 years ago, and probably fair to say back then we were both competitors, in quotes, but now we're solid collaborators. I've learned a lot. Over the years, we've been on various protest actions together, shared some deep personal development experiences, and we're firm friends with one big shared goal. If it's not obvious, I hold Donnachadh in huge respect. So he's an environmental auditor, campaigner, and the author of the book, The Prostitute State, How Britain's Democracy Was Hijacked, a book that I highly recommend to you, a book that also shook me quite a lot when I read it, in a good way, perhaps, waking us out of the dream state, perhaps. He successfully lifted the lid on a lot of things that simply aren't working for us, not for any of us at the moment. Donnachadh was deputy chair of the Lib Dem Party in 2002-2004 before stepping down 2005, and is now apolitical. And I didn't know this about you, Donnachadh, before this week, but sport-wise, you once played rugby before taking up the much harder sport, or is it an art, of ballet. And you've danced professionally both in Ireland and at Covent Garden. So I just raided through the many bios, and this is woefully inadequate, but I will just mention that you do attribute your passionate environmentalism to the time you spent with the Yanomami in the Amazon back in 1992. And over the last year or so, just as if I didn't think it was possible to respect Donnachadh any more than I already do, he's done a large number of TV interviews in the snake pit with very hostile right-wing channels such as GB News, which is, something I don't envy you doing. So before I hand over to you, Donnachadh, in just 1 minute, I really hope you'll enjoy speaking with us all tonight. Just a few quick things. We're going to ask you to speak for about 25 minutes, I guess with the aim of helping prepare us for all that lies ahead. There will be time for questions, as Etty said, at the end, but if you have anything burning, please feel free to type it into the chat. And are you okay to have I picked the wrong moment to hand over to you now, Donnachadh? Over to you.
I'm just slightly worried about my internet. I'm in the Cotswolds, but I'm on Wi-Fi. Can people hear and see me okay?
So far, so good.
Been freezing a lot. Okay, cool. Thanks you so much. Real privilege to be here, guys. I thought what I'd like to do for my 25 minutes introduction and opening before we open for question and answers, if I explain a little bit about how I got involved. Secondly, about why I think this is really important for all of us, including sports people. Talk a little bit about how I think the sports world needs to respond to the climate and ecological emergency. And then I want to talk strategy. I'm sure a lot of you sports people understand the word strategy. And I think we in the climate movement needs to think about strategy and how we win this. There's no greater game, no more important game than winning the net zero race to get us to carbon-free society if you want a future for future generations. So way back in 1992, I was a ballet dancer. I was working with the Royal Opera Ballet. I didn't give a damn about the environment. I knew nothing about the environment, to be frank with you. Always focused on, like many sports people or artists, It was just ballet, ballet, ballet. And one day I was doing a swallow dive on the Opera House stage in Covent Garden in London. I was standing on my colleague's shoulders doing a swallow dive, and from 12 foot, my colleagues missed. So I went from 12 foot to 0 and hit the deck chin first. I managed to survive, but one day my therapist was going with alternative practitioners. He dropped out and asked me, would I like to take their place? I bit on my finger. I was a ballet dancer and a jungle explorer, and I said yes. And so to make a long story short, I ended up by myself with the Yanomami Indians in the heart of the Amazon in '92 and saw the destruction of the rainforest. But more importantly, I became aware of the genocide. There were 6 million indigenous people living in the Amazon basin when our civilization arrived. There's now less than 600,000. And that genocide continues to stay as the rainforest is destroyed by miners, by ranchers, by soybean farmers growing soya for the European cow herd. So I was gutted, my heart was broken. I just knew these people hadn't a chance whilst our civilization was coming at them with a bulldozer. I came back to Britain and thought, well, what can I do? And in those days, it was very hard to understand how to live a green lifestyle. So I just tried to find out what I could. And I'm a Gandhian by principle. And what I mean by that is be the change, Gandhi said, that you wish to see in the world. And it's not that, my trying to live a low carbon, zero carbon lifestyle will save the planet. It won't. But what it does, by doing it ourselves, we give ourselves greater moral authority to ask others, whether it is our colleagues, families, government, businesses, media, to change. Because if we all don't change, the future of our kids is. So I started, the first thing I did is I said each time I'd buy shopping, I'd buy something organic, bought a jar of organic ketchup. That was my first step. Today in my house was London's first carbon negative house. My combined utility bills for gas, water, and electricity are minus 100. I export more than I use. I don't fly for holidays. I have lovely holidays in the UK or by train. I don't have a car. I'm plant-based diet. And why am I saying this? Because I just feel, is it because...
Oh, yeah, you're back, Donnachadh. Go on. You keep going, pal. You're just still about saying you feel something. There you go.
Thank you, Eddie. Sorry, the whole thing cut out there. Yeah, so I think I was just talking about my lifestyle. I feel that it's really important that those of us who are advocating change are doing it ourselves for moral authority. So I just want to talk about a couple of minutes now about having explained how I personally got involved. I think it's important just to have a couple of minutes talking about how serious the situation is. Way back in 2018, the United Nations General Secretary said, unless we started cutting carbon emissions radically by the end of 2020, humanity faced an existential crisis. And I think a lot of us, listen to the word existential. It doesn't sound that apocalyptic, but existential means the future of humanity is at stake. And he said, unless we started cutting our emissions radically within 2 years, we faced extinction. Well, the bad news is that we didn't cut our carbon emissions in those 2 years. And in the 5 years since, emissions have gone up almost every year. Emissions continue to rise. And the UN says that we're now looking, instead of cutting our emissions by 50%, which we needed to by 2030, we look as if we're going to rise by 14%. We are losing the game at the current race. We are way back at the end of the field. And remember, if we don't reduce by 1.5, the WHO said it'll be the greatest health catastrophe falling to humanity. The UN now says it's very unfeasible that we'll stay under 1.5. And Chatham House says that the 2 degrees centigrade rise in temperature, we've only got a 5% chance of avoiding it. It's not looking good on climate. And parallel to that, it's not just a climate emergency, we've also got a soil emergency and a wildlife emergency. Humanity is our soil since the start of the agricultural revolution. We have lost 50% of our soil. This applies in many countries across the world, including the United Kingdom. In the United Kingdom, the government says in many of our soils, we've only got 30 to 40 crops left. In East Anglia, the most fertile part of the United Kingdom, The government says we've lost 85% of our soils. Industrial agriculture is gobbling up the future ability of future generations to eat. We have to tackle the industrial agricultural culture. And then thirdly, the third crisis I want to just briefly touch on was the wildlife crisis. I'm going to just draw a little graph. Hopefully you'll be able to see it. I'm going to draw a circle. Very elaborate graph. And so I don't know whether you can see that circle. Yeah, you can see that circle. What that circle represents is I'm 64 years old. That circle represents all of the wildlife that was on the planet when I was born. And since I was born in 1959, over the last 64 years, what has happened, if you can see that on the screen, we have destroyed 70% of the wildlife that was on the planet when I was born. And we're losing around 1% per year at the moment with the destruction of wildlife in the oceans and the rainforests, etc. If we continue at 1% and I live till I'm 90, by the time I die, if I die then, we'll have lost 90% of the wildlife that was on the planet. All of the extraordinary riches of tapestry of wildlife, birds, animals, fish, amphibians that were there, inherited over millions of years. My generation may have destroyed it. For me, this is a moral issue. It is immorally acceptable that our generation could actually do something to future generations that has destroyed our legacy. In American indigenous traditions, they say we need to think about 7 generations ahead with every decision we take. I'm arguing that our generation is only thinking of our generation, and we're not thinking of future generations. And this has got to stop. That's why we're talking here this evening. So that's my briefly touching on why this is so important. And so then I'd like to move on to what I think the issues are facing the sports world. And I think the sports world is really important because you're such a powerful cultural force in our society. Just look at our papers. Something like 30 to 40% of the papers are coverage of sports, page after page of it. It's such an emotional, spiritual center to many countries' life is their sport. And if we can touch that spirit of sport in connection with this urgent race for survival, maybe we might make a huge contribution. So some of the issues that are relevant to the sports world. First of all, I would like to talk, it's the sports stadiums themselves, sports venues. We really need to show these need to become shining examples in the middle of our communities of net zero facilities. We cannot afford any longer to be using fossil fuels to heat or light or power our sports centres. They must become beacons of net zero vision. Secondly, we must actually tackle the issue of international travel. I personally view that I'm not opposed to international competitions. I'm not opposed to international travel by top sports people. What I am opposed to and what we cannot afford is international fan travel. 2,500 fans traveling for a UEFA Cup from London to Turkey, that would be around 2,500 tons of carbon just for the flight, which is equivalent of 300 to 400 homes emissions for an entire year, everything for the household. If you add that up for every single UEFA Cup match, every international competition, whether Olympics, international sporting events, rugby, tennis, netball, etc., we cannot afford international travel for sporting fans any longer. It's just not tenable. Then we move on to the food that's consumed in our sports stadium. If, let's say, in a 60,000 stadium, there's around 2,000 hamburgers sold per match. Meat is one of the largest contributors globally to fossil fuels. Every hamburger is 7 kilograms of CO2. And so for 2,000 people, that's around 14 tons of carbon, which is equivalent to around 30 years of electricity for one household. We have to move to a plant-based diet in our catering. And finally, an important issue is sponsorship. Many of you have seen the Just Stop Oil protests at sporting events in the United Kingdom, whether it's the snooker, the cricket, or the tennis. or the cycling. What you may not have picked up from the media is why those protests were so important in relation to the demand that we have no new fossil fuels. The reason why is, for example, cricket is sponsored in Britain by JP Morgan, the world's largest fossil fuel funding bank funding the destruction of the planet rather than the saving of the planet. Wembley was sponsored by Europe's largest fossil fuel funding bank, Barclays. And the British cycling in the United Kingdom is sponsored by Shell. So we have the largest oil companies, the largest banks in Europe, the largest banks in the world funding our destruction, are funding our sports. I personally think emotionally, this is a betrayal of the young sports people. The young people who are 10, 12, 14, 15 today, by the time 2100 come, which is only less than 70, 80 years away, they'll be facing a planet on fire far, far worse than we're facing today. It is untenable that sports people can stand with logos on their chests, promoting the greenwashing of sport and funding the destruction of our planet. We have to kick fossil fuels out of sport. So the final thing I want to talk on was strategy. I remember one of the most powerful documents I've ever read, and you'll be surprised at this, was by the American petroleum industry. It was a strategy for how they were going to destroy and defeat the Kyoto Treaty, which was a treaty signed way back in the early 90s to try and reduce globally, agreed by the world nations to start cutting carbon emissions. And what was leaked to the New York Times was a strategy paper by the American petroleum industry as how they would destroy Kyoto. And I admire it because it actually set out very clearly the goals, who the targets were, how they would impact the media, how the media would impact politics, and how they would win in the end. And after a 2-year campaign, the Kyoto Treaty came up to be voted on in the US Senate, and it won 98 votes to 0. Not a single Republican, not a single Democrat voted for it. Only 2 had the guts to abstain. And the Kyoto Treaty was killed. And the hope for humanity to start cutting emissions when they were desperately needed in the 90s, when we might have avoided what we're now facing around the world today. And we missed that chance through to a strategy paper and a strategy that was expertly implemented by the petroleum industry. So I said to myself, who's doing strategy for us? Where's our coach? Where's our international coach saying to all of the thousands of organizations and the millions of people who are behind and supporting climate action? Where's our coach? Where's our strategy? And there wasn't one. And I said, well, what would I do if I had one? I think when you do a strategy, you need to know your opponent and you need to know your team, your strengths and your weaknesses. So I came up with a theory that there are 4 pillars to our opponents, 4 pillars of the fossil fueled economy. And those 4 pillars are, first of all, there's government, which does the regulation of the fossil fuel industry. Secondly, there's the banks that fund the fossil fuel industry. Thirdly, there's the oil companies that implement and deliver the fossil fueled economy. But fourthly, the 4th pillar is the media, the global corporate media, that actually provide the political and social permission for the other 3 pillars to exist and to destroy us. So that's our opponents. And what's there on our side? On our side, the climate movement has always focused on tackling government, tackling business, and tackling civil society. We've had 3 pillars of the climate movement. And I'm arguing that we're missing the 4th pillar. And the 4th pillar is the media, the 4th estate. We as a climate movement has gone to them as supplicants. Please cover our protests. Please cover our demands. Please cover our actions. But we've never said, come and join us. Come and you are a powerful pillar that actually can help us win this. And so I believe we need, as a climate movement, to adopt a strategy that we need to get the 4th pillar of the fossil fuels movement over to join the 3 pillars of the climate movement and make us 4 pillars. And I would argue then, within a year to 2, can you imagine if the world's global corporate media were enthusiastically on the side of climate action. Imagine how the other three pillars of the climate movement would move from. They would move, the oil companies would become renewable energy companies. The banks would start funding the renewable energy economy, and the governments would provide the regulation and the encouragement, the inspiration and the education to move all of society to win this race. So that's what I believe the strategy should be. And what is the role of sports people in this? Well, many of you may have contacts with sports. When there's actually climate actions or protests, you can actually be volunteer spokespersons. If you're at a protest, if you're actually playing in a sport and somebody turns up with a protest, you could actually stand by them and say, I stand with them. You could wear a JSO t-shirt. You could say, I'm in favor of climate action. Or you could, if maybe you know people, powerful people who may know people in the top of the media, and you could lobby them. Imagine what would happen then. And I'll just finish my talk with a vision. If you take yourselves back to the COVID crisis around the world, we had a unity between the public, the population, and the media. All three of us agreed lockdowns need to happen and we need to protect ourselves. And humanity and society did that. And we tackled and we came through at the other end when we found a solution to protecting ourselves. And so therefore, I can imagine if we could replicate that, if we could get all of the global media, the governments and the people on the same side, we could win this race. So my message is focus on the media, use the power of sport to pressure them and bring them, those 100 to 200 world global leaders and editors and owners onto our side, and we can win this race. Thank you so much for questions.
All right. Thank you so much, Donnachadh. That was really good. And I know it was a little bit sketchy perhaps on the internet for some people. Hopefully you managed to hear. And you can, of course, ask questions if you missed any of those, any of the bits. But Donnachadh, thank you. I think it was really good to hear about this clarity of the strategy, and you kind of really making it clear about the role that sports could play. I'm just wondering if I can, if anyone's got any questions. First of all, you can put your Zoom hand up straight away. We've got one, and I've got a question as well. And please feel free to type the questions in the chat as well. But thank you, Donnachadh. That was really, really interesting, and let's hope to hear some more from you. So, Ben, if you don't mind, I'll bring you in. Do you want to speak your question out, or do you want me to? Yeah, go for it.
I can speak it out. Firstly, thank you so much for that talk. So interesting, and really drawing on such wealth of experience, which I love to hear. Just talking about what you were saying about how the political process can be so ably used to block, pretty important agreements. What do you make of the sort of short-termism of like the political cycle? Because even in my local community, I find that the council are having to make very short-term solutions to the voters, as in, we'll need to fix things tomorrow. But of course, when it comes to environmentalism, we're talking quite long-term. How do you see that reconciliation between the long-term vision and the short-term needs?
I think it goes back to, you do raise a point that is valid, that we are running on 4-year cycles in the political cycles. But my core argument is that the media can address that. I've seen again over my time, the media, if the media pile onto something, it's amazing how fast the political cycle speeds up and delivers. I've seen the translation of the headlines in the Daily Mail and the Sun in the United Kingdom translating into policy within 5 to 6 months. There's many things we can do in the short term that we don't have to have long-term planning. But if my view is that if in the short term we get the media on board, the medium and long term will take care of themselves, because we'll have the 3 pillars of the fossil fuel economy over on our side. If you've got finance, media, government, and civil society pulling together, we can pull this off.
Okay, thank you, Ben. I'll come to Dan next. Over to you, Dan.
Hello, thanks, Etienne, and thanks, Donnachadh. I really enjoyed that. Really resonated, and yeah, the stuff around the media. Just I think about it so much, and yeah, I just couldn't agree with you more. I suppose I'm just really interested to talk about the kind of the challenge. Well, I suppose the challenge that I perceive that we're faced with in that regard around and I don't know the exact numbers, but whether it is, 80% of the UK media owned by 4 billionaires, I've forgotten the exact numbers, and they're linked to investments in fossil fuels and nothing, stuff that everybody knows. But what's your thoughts on how we kind of break that cycle, and if there's anything that we can do to support that? Because it feels like such an overwhelming concept, and you've got these few people, these handful of people really, who are controlling so much of the media with such an agenda behind it. And obviously, as you said, the impact they have on everything else, it almost just feels quite overwhelming. But I wonder if there's just thoughts on, the steps that we as a community can take in that regard, or any thoughts on that really.
Sure, thank you. It's great that you actually hear the basic message I'm talking about, because to me it's the most important one. It's a $12 trillion question, to be frank with you. What I would say is that I think awareness is the first thing we need to do. The challenge that we've got is it's a catch-22. The multi-billionaire media owners control the open window in terms of what we talk about and what our political agendas are. And so how do you actually get onto the agenda and the political agenda their political power? Because obviously it's not in their political interest to do so. So that's the real challenge. So I'd argue one of the ways sports people can make a contribution to that is, in many ways, the sports departments, writers, etc., are kind of slightly under the radar from the main editor and owners, and they have a facility to write about this in ways that maybe the political pages or the business pages don't. I think sports people can help in that regard, but also I think in actually prominent spokespeople, we've seen Gary Lineker recently putting his head above the parapet, and he's almost strong enough that actually he can be heard. And I think that's what sports people have, is they've got access to the microphone that the climate movement generally does not. And anytime we can use the microphone to raise the issue of pleading, encouraging, educating the public and the media about their role to step up, to join with us, to save us, would be really important. To be frank with you, this is a campaign that's really challenging because everybody in the movement are also subject to this ecosystem controlled mainly by the billionaire media globally, whether it's, if you look at Australia, United Kingdom, America, etc., the billionaire media is one of the biggest political issues of our time, a real threat to democracy, etc. But it's not just now a threat to democracy, it's a threat to our survival. And I would say that, as long as we start identifying what the challenge is, like in any, I remember, as any sports person says, winning the gold at the Olympics is impossible. And so you set out on the street to that. I know what the goal is. The goal is to get the global corporate media on our side. There's around 200 key players. Surely as a team of millions and billions, we can actually, with collective different strategies, we can get them in one way or another over to our side. There's a whole plethora of ways we can do that, but whichever one you think you might be able to assist, please join us as soon as possible.
Thank you, Donnachadh. That's really interesting, and I'm going to ask a question myself in a moment, but I see Callum has got his hand up, and I'll come to you, Callum, if you would ask your question now. Thank you.
Yeah, I just wondered how, because I completely agree that like we really need to focus on sports people's influence in the culture and the media. But I think a thing that really puts sports people off is them, being called hypocrites, because often they're the ones with like the biggest footprints often. So I just wondered if you had any thoughts on navigating that, and how we can kind of like make sports people feel confident, even though they are having like big footprints.
Sure. As you heard, I personally don't take the view that we should be encouraging international spokespeople not to participate in international sport. I don't advocate that we should abandon international sport. I advocate that we should abandon international fan travel. where I think the way to negotiate this is to say, if you can actually personally make a commitment that you will stop flying for holidays. I think if international sports people could make that commitment collectively, that could actually help tackle the hypocrisy accusation. I think you can say by keeping international sport going, you're keeping inspirational going, you're keeping encouragement, inspiration for the next generation to participate in sport and to be healthy, etc. But actually you recognize your responsibility as leading figures, cultural figures in our society, and make that commitment. I think it goes back to Gandhi, be the change you wish to see in the world. I think that's somewhere, if you can actually make your home carbon negative like I have, it doesn't cost a huge amount of money. If you are in a reasonably successful international sports person, and if you can make the commitment, I'll make my home zero carbon. I will not fly for holidays, but I will continue my career as a sports person. That's the way I would address it, Callum.
Thank you very much. So my question is around your kind of a little bit connecting to your history, Donnachadh, as an athlete. When you were training and taking part and pushing, you had an amazing story when you told me. It'd be interesting if you share, the level that you started at and what you achieved. That'd be cool. My side question is, what kind of mindset do you see is useful? What are the qualities perhaps, and what are the trained abilities that lots of sports people might have that can be brought to bear perhaps in this situation?
Sure, thank you. Well, just to address the crazy story, first of all, I was a third-year medical student and decided I didn't want to be a doctor any longer, so I dropped out of college. And I met a girl at a party who was a ballet dancer. And I said, oh, I've never met a ballet dancer before. I love ballet. I've seen it a number of times with my former girlfriend. Is there anywhere a guy my age could do ballet? And she said, yeah, try the Cork Ballet School. They've got a business girls keep fit class, but come ballet. So I went and did it. And I said, oh, I love this. I want to do this for the rest of my life. And so I was 20. And within a year, I was... So I just started doing class all the time. Forget Billy Elliot. I was this big clumping guy in the ballet class, classes with these tiny little girls. And I was doing amateur ballet for a year, and then after a year, I got taken in as a student with the Irish National Ballet. And after 2 years, they said, look, forget it. And I ended up auditioning for the Dublin City Ballet and became a professional within 2 years, which is nuts. So I kind of set spiritually or vision-wise, I thought I wanted to prove the impossible was possible. And I thought, well, what's impossible starting at 20 as a dancer? And what's impossible is to dance at Covent Garden. You have to start at 12. You have to go through the Royal Ballet School. You have to go through the whole system. You do not get to dance at Covent Garden unless you've done that. And you certainly can't get to dance at Covent Garden starting at 20. Well, 7 years later, I got into the back door with the Royal Opera Ballet, which is a company that they hire for the ballet, for the operas. And 7 years later, I was dancing in Tannhäuser at the Royal Opera Ballet, which was like a huge excitement. And that was my goal as a dancer, as an athlete. Obviously, it took a huge amount of personal commitment, challenge, emotional challenge. I think what being a sports person or that type of dancer does, it challenges you emotionally, spiritually, and physically, and to take on this greatest challenge of our history, not just our generation. It does take stamina to engage with the size of the crises. So I do a lot of self-care. I do keep myself fit. I do yoga. I do meditation. I go on retreats. So I take care of myself emotionally, physically, and spiritually to enable myself to keep going with this challenge. We need everybody in this room to commit themselves at this level. The size of the challenge is terrifying. Our entire future for our kids is at stake. And engaging with the level of threat and understanding the destruction that's beginning to unfold around us takes a lot of emotional and spiritual strength. And I think that is something that top sports people bring. You don't become a top sports person unless you're emotionally and spiritually strong, as well as physically committed and disciplined. And it's that balance, I think, sports people can bring to this huge global humanity effort.
Thank you, Donnachadh. And just to follow up on one little question, I know that you, Dave, alluded to this in your introduction, and I have acted as a spokesperson sometimes for Extinction Rebellion, and I've been involved in interviews with, you know, what I would describe as somewhat hostile, in inverted commas, questions where people are looking to really, I would say, entertain their audience rather than to convey, you know, the facts and the importance of what's going on, and are potentially coming from a position of climate denial, outright denial, or sometimes even just kind of soft delayism, or whatever you want to call it. And those are really taxing. You know, to me, I'd say it's more scary sometimes than being in the Olympics and being on the start line or being on one of those biggest races that I ever did. I was wondering what you go through and what your thoughts are on those kind of encounters, because they are kind of almost like peak experiences. I suggest, you know, peak intensity experiences, whether or not they're peak performances. I think because you're facing such a difficult opponent, sometimes it's, you know, it's almost impossible to feel successful. In fact, you're set up not to be successful. But I was wondering, can you kind of talk a little bit about like that? Because, you know, I'm not sure how many people here will ever find themselves in that place. You know, you are an elite performer in that regard, and perhaps, you know, in a handful of people who would actually go there. But I just thought it'd be nice to hear a little bit about, you know, kind of what that is like and how kind of hardcore it is.
What Etienne is referring to is I made a decision around 3 or 4 years ago that, you know, politically, this is not a left-right issue. This is an all of us issue. I think many people involved in NGOs and climate movement are quite often come from the center or the center left of politics. And so the bias is against engaging with the right. And if we don't engage with the right, remember, up to 50% of the public in any country in the world, whatever democracy you're facing, up to 50% people vote with right-wing views. And we must respect them, and we must reach out to them, engage with them. And so I was saying that the climate movement was not engaging with right-wing media. And I made a resolution to myself 3 or 4 years ago that anytime I'm invited onto a shock jock or a far right or a right-wing TV or radio program, I would accept the invitation and try and engage. And I don't regret that, but it is incredibly can be incredibly challenging. I try and approach it that I'm not there to battle the person who's interviewing me. I'm there to try and reach through them to the audience that's speaking to us, and I'm there to try and stay grounded and convey the urgency and the practicality of the message. I find 9 times out of 10, they want to talk about their anger against climate actions and protests. They only want to talk about tactics. And it's very easy to get involved and get caught up in the anger around, why can't you listen to us protesters and take some action? And what I take the view differently. I think that we are there because they want to talk about the tactics, and I will spend 20, 30 seconds talking about the tactics. And then I'll go on to talk about maybe the 3 key messages I may want to get across in that interview, which I'll have prepared beforehand. And I will do my best to make sure that I try and be polite, try and be nice to them, always try and not get angry, but actually deal with their initial issue and then focus on what I think needs to get across, the key messages of how we need to cut our carbon, what we need our governments to do, what we need individually to do around meat, around electricity, around transport, around flying, and around consumption. So the messages are really simple. You know, we just need to move to plant-based diet. We need to have our homes with green electricity. We need to have flight-free holidays. We need to try and do public transport and cycling for surface transport. And we need to start reducing our consumption of goods. It's not rocket science. And so I try and stick to those messages. And I have had some work. I mean, I've taken on some of the worst shock jocks in British TV and radio, and quite often I get, respect from them. They say, well, at least we disagree with every word you said, but you're willing to come on and respectfully engage. And quite often they do move to that position. Sometimes it's brutal, and I come off, and it takes me a day to pull myself off the ceiling after the abuse you sometimes get. But I think it's really important to engage with the right wing, whatever our politics is. It's not right, left. We must get across the message. This is all, whatever your political views are, we need to win. Whether you're right wing and you favor the economy, there's no economy on a dead planet. If you're left wing, you care about social issues, there's no equality, there's no social services on a dead planet. If you're a centrist and you believe in human rights, there are no human rights on a dead planet. This is left, right, and centre all together to win this race.
Thank you, Donnachadh. That's really impressive. And just want to say personal thanks to you. I'm see you with your hand up, Dave. I'm just going to ask a question that's in the chat. And I think this is kind of like a clarification, and the people who are asking it will forgive me, hopefully, if I kind of mangle it. But I think you've been talking back in just a question or two back, you were talking about your own personal footprint and talking about that as a part of being a kind of solid, a messenger perhaps, but not getting bogged down in your personal, kind of position or what you've done, because we're really trying to, or you're advocating to try to push back, these pillars. We're trying to specifically bring on this fourth pillar, as you describe it, as a of the media. Can you just be really clear that is, that's what you're saying? So I was just checking, I suppose, just this balance between your personal decisions and lifestyle and versus actually this is clearly a systemic issue that you're trying to take on.
Well, I know my position is slightly outside the norm. I think a lot of people argue we shouldn't talk about personal behavior. I come from the point of view of Gandhi. Gandhi is an inspirational leader. He took on the world's greatest empire, not because he lived a very simple lifestyle, not because he actually picked up a lump of salt from the sea and broke the law and did nonviolent direct action. I think this is a spiritual thing. It's about a spiritual moral power of doing the best you can within the amount of money you have, the amount of time you have, the amount of knowledge you have, the amount of family commitments you have. Are you doing what you can? And I would argue that, I was asked the question about what do we do about sports people being accused of hypocrites because they fly. I said, I accept you will fly because you're an international sports person. I don't want to stop that. But if you're also flying around on your private jet on holidays to the Maldives and to South Africa, and then you go on telly saying, we must cut our carbon footprints, government must help us. We won't do this alone. We won't do this by personal action. We'll do it by government action. We need action at every level. So the problem with the climate movement for me, and I'm maybe unusual on this, is there's this argument whether it's personal behavior or whether it's government systemic behavior. I'm a liberal. I'm saying it's both. We all have to change, and we have to change our government. It is not enough for me to change my life, but I believe my going out to advocate it with banks, with governments, with people, with sports people, by having done it myself, people hear me, I think, clearer. I come across, I think, with more power. And we need power to win a race. And I think personal behavior is part of the fuel that helps us win that race and makes us more powerful voices to be heard. It's crucial in my view that it's both. It's not enough to do it ourselves. We must then advocate it.
It was very clear. That's very good. Thank you. Over to you, Dave. Thank you, Dave.
Yeah, thanks, Etty, and thank you so much, Donnachadh, as ever. I'm thinking to myself how good it is to have the spiritual dimension brought into one of these Zooms. I don't think it's cropped up that often. I think you said, I wrote it down, something like sport is an emotional, spiritual center. And I just love that line. And I think all of us in the Champs for Earth team are always curious why it just turns out that sports people are often, and can be even more so, in this pivotal role in history. I certainly believe that. We've got some quotes to back that up, but also there's a fairly famous MIT study that updates like who are the influencers over the centuries, and it used to be politicians, used to be actors, it's now sports people, it's now footballers. And I will stop rabbiting on, but I had to get this quote right. But there's a Bill Shankly quote which Google says eloquently demonstrates the Liverpool legend's dedication to the beautiful game. Apparently, he said some people believe football is a matter of life and death. I'm very disappointed with that attitude. I can assure you it's much, much more important than that. Given the crisis we've got, it's like there's something about sport that, and I haven't got the question, I haven't got the answer, but I just feel we're onto something when we look at, and I haven't necessarily got a faith or an absence of a faith, and it's not coming from a spiritual place, but just if we're going to spirit our way through this, what would you say to all of that?
Thank you. When I say spiritual, I'm obviously using it with small s rather than big S. But I think there is something to be said. You know, underpinning most spiritual beliefs in my studies and my understanding is that in the beginning is the Word, and the Word is made flesh. What I mean by that is the beginning is a thought, and then we make the thought happen. You can describe that as a divine action or spiritual action or a human action. But a sports person cannot win a gold medal at the Olympics unless they first have the thought. And then they have to invest in the training and the belief, spiritual belief, that they can make that impossible thing happen, that they, a young girl growing up in Peckham, can become the world champion at a 100 meters race. And I think, you know, this amazing spirit that comes around when a country goes to the World Cup is taking the spirit of the country. And so I think there's that aspect to it, but also I think there's the aspect of sports people inspire people, inspiration. I hadn't actually thought about that before. So sports people are putting spirit into young people that they can believe in themselves to achieve the impossible. And so that's what I am saying tonight, is that I'm challenging all of us in this room tonight to say there's something impossible that we have to achieve. And that's we've got to get 200 people who control the global media to come onto our side to help save humanity. That's the 200-meter race that's impossible for me to win, but we have to believe we can win it.
Thank you, Donnachadh. I got one last question to you, if that's okay, and then I think we will wrap this one up. And this is from the chat, and it says, Donnachadh, do you have a good idea of the combined impact of international fan travel versus athlete travel? So I'm guessing it's like the entirety of an athlete's career versus a fan's career as such. And yeah, it feels like it would be a lot easier to stop fans traveling, given that they can still watch from afar. But I would guess that the far bigger footprint would be from the athletes. Do you have any like data or information about that?
No, I was hoping to do a back of the fag packet calculation of what the UEFA Cup might involve in terms of flights. So the only calculation I did was the 2,500 tons it would take to fly the fans to Ankara from London for one match. So 2,500 tons it would be, as I say, 2,500 tons is 5,000 homes electricity for a year. So you'd have to turn off your electricity in 5,000, everything, all the electricity, everything in a house for an entire year, or for 5,000 years for one person to make up the emissions from just the fans flying to one match for one night. Does that help in stats? But I think it's something, if I hadn't been fired from the Independent when the Daily Mail took over the Independent, it's just something I wanted to do as a columnist, to do the calculations of just the Olympics, for example, and just actually trying to do some back of fact calculations to get across. It's the fan travel is the real issue here.
Oh, thank you, Donnachadh. I do believe there are actually people doing this work, and I can't quite connect it in my brain, but I'm absolutely sure, and it'd be really interesting. So I think what we'll do there is we'll stop the recording, and once again say thank you to you, Donnachadh, for being here. It was really important and interesting and very clear. So I would just like to say thank you to our guests. It is 5 minutes to 9. I think I'm going to end up finishing slightly early because I think, oh yes, someone's just saying in here, sorry, Mike Berners-Lee did a World Cup one. So yes, it was, there was the World Cup. Mike Berners-Lee did do a whole lot of calculations about that and worked out it was the biggest carbon event of the history of the world. So anyway, yes. It was crazy. Yeah, sorry, Donnachadh, I hurt your ears on that one. So I just want to invite everybody to stay in touch with us on Champions for Earth. You know how to find us. Please, we'll send out a follow-up email. Join our WhatsApp broadcast, which you can get to hear what's going on. If you yourself are feeling overwhelmed or conflicted or finding this whole situation to be very hard, too hard sometimes, please reach out to us and connect with us at the Champions for Earth email address or in any of the other ways that you can find. We really value that place and understand that, you know, we're going through this ourselves. We believe that this community that we're building here has the ability to at least hold us in this difficult times. And also, if you've got anything that you're excited about, that you're hearing or that you're planning, we are launching, or we're starting work on a series of, we're calling them vidcasts. They're basically recorded Zoom meetings between us all here with a really interesting guests. We're going to talk about all sorts of interesting things. We're going to put them straight onto YouTube. So we won't be bothering you every week with inviting you to Zooms. They'll be straight onto YouTube and you'll be able to hear them and listen to them at your time and watch them, because we're going to have some really cool guests. So if you think you would like to be on one of those, or you know someone who would, or you've got something really cool to talk about, get in touch with us about that as well. So really, we want to just reiterate, Champions for Earth is here for this community. We want to serve it in whatever way we can. And we believe, as Donnachadh has explained in The Power of Sport, you know, we talk about the power of the spirit. I've talked about spirit even before I even, you know, knew what that really was. You know, some energy. What is it? I don't know. It's some part of sport, I do believe. And we want to nurture your spirit, and we want to empower you. We want to give you the tools. We want to give you that power so that you can go out and do whatever it is that you feel is the right thing to do. And hopefully we can all be working together on this as a big team. So I will end it there. Say thank you to everybody. If you would be so kind and to unmute yourselves and say thank you to Donnachadh, say good night, and do stay in touch with us. And much love to everybody, much respect to everything that you're all doing and pushing those comfort zones that we all are trying to do in these times. So thank you, Donnachadh, once again. Good night, everybody.